Well, good morning. Glad you could join us today. We have a busy political year coming up in Michigan, and this morning we'll be talking with someone with UP roots who's been an active participant in that process for many years. We'll start the conversation right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, Steve Mitchell has been chairman of Mitchell Research and Communications since he founded the company in 1985. He's worked in more than 40 states for corporate, media, governmental, and association clients. His political clients have included governors, senators, members of Congress, state legislators, mayors, judges, school districts, cities, townships, counties, and states. Key media outlets in Detroit, Lansing, and elsewhere have also looked to Mitchell for insights into political polling developed by his company. He's been active in many organizations and currently serves as a trustee and vice chair of the board of Northern Michigan University. Steve is our guest this morning. Welcome to the Ryan Report.
It is always terrific to see you again, Don, and to be on the Ryan Report.
And we should fess up here. You know, we're both Ishpeming guys.
That's absolutely, and very proud of it.
And you graduated as a hematite, although it was a few years after me.
One or two, but that's all.
Yeah,
one or two, that's all. Yeah, I'm a hematite. I was born in Ishpeming, moved away when I was 5, and then moved back again when I was 16 and stayed in the Upper Peninsula for another 16 years after that before I went down to Lansing to go to work for the House Republican Caucus and then get into the work that I've been doing now since 1983.
And we should slip in here that you were an NMU graduate in the interim.
I certainly was. I had a tremendous education at Northern, really had outstanding professors, and have always been very proud of the fact that I'm a Wildcat and that I went to Northern Michigan after graduating from Ishpeming High.
We're going to circle back and talk about some of your current involvement as vice chair of the Board of Trustees. Let's talk a little more about your career, though. You started down that road, but you toiled for a long time in the political vineyards, let's say, before you actually started your own company.
Yeah, I did. My first involvement was with a guy that you knew well, and that was Phil Ruppe.
Right.
I worked on his first U.S. congressional campaign in 1966, so I've been involved in this now for 50 years. Then I was a school teacher for 6 years in Gladstone, opened up my own bar and restaurant in Escanaba, which had a lot of success before it didn't have a lot of success, and then went into politics in 1979.
You were there any particularly memorable races you look back on that you were?
Well, I think always, you know, when you're involved in politics, if you can be involved in a presidential race, that's always the most exciting one. And I was on the national staff of Reagan-Bush 84, working for the president in Washington State, and in charge of all the voter programs and as chief spokesperson in Washington State. So that was really an exciting opportunity to do that, and to do some of the media work I've done. KCBS TV in Los Angeles, KCAL TV in Los Angeles, Cover TV up in Fresno, over in Fresno, and Cover up in Sacramento, and KFSN in Sacramento. So, and then working in the Detroit media for all these years too. So that's been a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, and so at that point, after the Bush campaign, you decided to open your own company.
Yes, I certainly did. 1985, and since then it's just been terrific. Still doing it after all these years. Still enjoying it a great deal. Doing a lot of public relations as well as political polling.
The you know, as you look back on that, have things changed a lot over those years?
Oh, absolutely. Things have changed a great deal, especially in polling. Polling was much easier 20 years ago when everybody had landlines, and now you have to deal with cell phones, and you have to deal with other methods of collecting data, and we're still pretty accurate, but we're not as accurate as we were. It's a lot tougher business, but we still provide sort of the scoreboard of people. You know, everybody wants to know who's ahead and behind and by how much, and so we're still able to do that and still do it with a pretty good degree of accuracy.
And we would frequently hear your name in the Detroit Free Press, Detroit News, the Detroit TV stations. They really look to your company and to you to provide that information.
Yeah, it's been terrific. You know, I'm a small town kid from Ishpeming, having the opportunity to do the things that I've done, and I never take it for granted. I only take it with just a real appreciation of having had a chance to do a lot of things that most people don't get a chance to do. So it's been really very humbling, and I've really enjoyed it, and still continue to enjoy it to this day.
Obviously, you've probably met a lot of really interesting people through your work.
You know, I have. That's the fun thing about it. You meet a lot of the media people. I must admit, and I've had the opportunity to shake hands with 8 presidents, but if at the end of the time I've been around, I had a chance when I worked for Phil Ruppy's U.S. Senate campaign in 1981 to sit down with Henry Ford II.
Really?
For an hour and a half, just the 3 of us.
Yeah.
And you know, here's a guy whose name is on the building, who was in charge of the Ford Motor Company from 1945 to 1974, and who was a giant of industry. And you know, we're sitting in there, and he offers me a big cigar. So I had a big cigar with Henry Ford II. I mean, you just, those are things you don't get a chance to do unless you're in politics.
Yeah. Speaking of the polling, perhaps a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the candidates do polling as well to find out where their race is going, don't they?
Yeah, they certainly do, and they continue to do it. It's vitally important for candidates to do it, and just not to determine whether or not they're ahead or behind, but to try to find out what issues are going to move the voters. They need to know, is the most important issue jobs in the economy? And we also always test what are the strengths that we have, our candidate has, and what are the negatives that our opponent has. You know, you see all these negative attack ads on television. Well, we pollsters have to try to figure out what those negatives are.
Right.
So then the candidates and the advertising companies hammer the opponent for voting for taxes, or voting for this issue, or voting against another issue. So political polling is really important to find out how to message your campaign to be a successful campaign. How do you define yourself as the good person and define your opponent as the bad person?
Okay, and you're part of that process.
We're part of that process of whatever one might want to call it.
I want to talk about what's coming up in Michigan this year. We'll do that in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Our guest this morning is Steve Mitchell, Mitchell Research and Communications, also a member of the NMU Board of Trustees. Let's talk about politics today. You know, have we ever seen a time in history when the country has been this divided? And I realize you don't go back to
No,
the
we
beginning.
haven't. Very quickly, quick story. My mother and dad came up to Seattle when I worked for the president, and my mother had been a fan of Ronald Reagan forever. And I said I didn't know if I could get him into the $5,000 reception, but I did a big favor for the advanced staff, and so they really liked me. And so my mother and dad had a chance to meet Ronald Reagan. And of all the things I did in politics, having the opportunity to introduce my mother and dad to the president that they loved was the greatest thing I ever did. It was just wonderful. Now to get to your question, those were simpler times than we have right now, but this is such a divided time. It is incredible at the families torn apart, marriages torn apart, friendships, lifelong friendships torn apart because one person doesn't like Ronald Reagan, or excuse me, doesn't like Donald Trump, and another does. And at the state level, just this tremendous division. And I don't know how we get it back, Don. I really don't know how we get it back.
And apart from issues, has the president maybe somewhat made it worse by the way he conducts himself?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Donald Trump is been incredible in the way that he has been able to rile people up. And you know, what I always say is, you got the shiny object out here that's the tweets and all the other things that he does, and some of the things that he says, and then you take a look at what he has been doing in terms of the tax cut, in terms of appointing conservative justices, in terms of all these things, and he's actually got a pretty good record. And so as you look at the 2018 elections and at the 2020 elections, and even if he's elected or not in 2020 and the 22 elections, all these elections are going to be about Donald Trump.
Right.
I mean, he is the driver of the elections. And what we've been seeing in the national polls, and even here in some polling data I've seen in Michigan, is that as a result of the tax increase, he's actually getting much higher. His favorable nationally has gone up from about 38% in the Real Clear Politics averages up to about 43% right now.
Okay.
And so he's getting more popular. But yes, I mean, there's no doubt that Trump causes a large number of the problems he has, but it's as a result of some of those things that he is as popular as he is with a base. I mean, when you look at the election totals in the Upper Peninsula and you see every county in the UP except for Marquette voting for a Republican candidate for president.
It's very unusual.
Unbelievably unusual.
Let's talk about Michigan. Michigan, you know, in many ways, this year is bigger than a presidential year. The off year in Michigan, because you have the governor, you have the attorney general, the secretary of state, the whole legislature is up. Any general predictions going into this election?
My general prediction 2 years ago was that if you look at national politics, every 8 years since the end of World War II, it's now 73 years, the White House shifted hands every 8 years from Democrat to Republican. And so therefore I made the conclusion that whomever the Republican candidate for president was going to be was probably going to be president. Same thing happens in Michigan. We, whenever there's an open seat, tend to vote in the party that's out of power. That would lead me to believe that it's likely a Democrat could be the next governor of Michigan, and that would also help down the line. The big issue is, in an off-year election like this, normally the party that's in the White House will lose 33 seats in the United States House of Representatives. They'll lose control of the Senate. And that certainly is what happened with Barack Obama in 2010. The big difference between Barack Obama, and both of them had about the same popularity on January 1st of the year of the next election. The difference was Obama had a very unpopular health care bill, become more popular since then, but Trump has what is coming to be a very popular tax cut package that he can tout. So, you know, my dire thoughts of even a couple of months ago are not quite as dire now. I'll have to take a wait-and-see attitude, and I still think it's a little too young to determine if it's going to be the Republicans or the Democrats who are going to be in the catbird seat for the 2018 elections.
We have less than a minute in this segment. Who do you think will be the two gubernatorial candidates when November comes around?
You know, I would, Bill Schuette had a pretty big lead. I think he's been making some mistakes lately. I think that Brian Calley, the lieutenant governor, has been able to capitalize on some of those things. It's a close race between Calley and Schuette. Probably Schuette has the upper edge right now. On the Democratic side, I think Gretchen Whitmer is running a very effective campaign, lots of endorsements. She's got some candidates spending a lot of money, like Sri Thanadar, against her, but my sense is that Gretchen Whitmer will probably be the Democratic candidate for governor.
Okay. I want to talk about what it's all about being an NMU trustee. We'll get back to that in just a minute.
Terrific.
Back with more on the Ryan Report after this break. Our guest today is Steve Mitchell. We're talking about the being on the NMU Board of Trustees. We should also mention you have a brother who's actively involved in education.
I certainly do. My twin brother Peter is now the president at Lake Superior State for this 1 year. The president died, and so Pete was able to come in, and he's done a terrific job, and I think that the enrollment that they're going to see at Lake Superior State next year is just going to be a huge increase as a result of his efforts and having a wonderful board and a good group to work with.
And he had a lot of experience before coming into that job.
Yes, he was president of Albion for 10 years.
What's the biggest challenge being a trustee at Northern Michigan University?
Well, first of all, it's a real honor to have the opportunity to serve on the board of the university that you attended is just a real honor. And you know, the challenges are in today's world, in enrollment, having to deal with the myriad problems that we have to deal with on campus that go beyond education. But we selected, I was on the search committee that selected Fritz Erickson. Fritz doing a terrific job, as is his whole staff. Carrie Schilling is provost, and Steve Andenoven and Gavin Leach, all the outstanding vice presidents there. And enrollment, freshman enrollment went up for the first time in years last year. Things are looking very good this year. We've got new dorms, new programs. Things are really upbeat at Northern Michigan University right now.
And innovation, I know, is one of the keys, and Did the board imagine how much attention they would get when they approved the marijuana program?
We understood that we would get a lot of attention on it. I'm not sure that we appreciated how much that we would get, but it's a great program. It's a tough program. Yeah. It's not this idea that we're pot university. This is a plant chemistry program, and you better be able to do a good job on the chemistry courses that are required to be a part of any plant chemistry program.
I have to ask you, we've just seen a horrendous situation at Michigan State University. And I know, not asking you to comment as an NMU trustee, but Steve Mitchell, a guy who's been involved, a guy who lives in Lansing, certainly has been involved in that way. I think the huge question on so many's minds is, how could something like this happen to so many people over such a long period of time?
I think it's because he was so well respected. Early on, 20 years ago, a couple of young women went to the coach, and she said, well, look, this is going to come down on you and him if you file charges, and scared him away. And somehow, I think his reputation was so good. I've heard stories, and we've all read them, of people literally being in the room with their child when he is sexually molesting them. So it's a tough situation. I know at Northern, under our chair, Bob Mahaney, our board is formed an ad hoc committee to take a look at all of our rules regarding this and policies regarding this. Alexis Hart's going to be chairing that. She's a senior human resources executive at Daimler Chrysler. Jim Haveman, who is a former head of the Department of Community Health here in Michigan, and Tammy Savoy, of course, a well-known Marquette attorney, will be on that committee to look over our policies. We think with Mike Bath, our Department of Security guy in charge of this, that we've done a good job with Fritz and everyone else, but we want to make sure. We all want to make sure.
This has to be eye-opening for anyone on a university board or a university president to be reminded once again that the buck stops at the top, and you may be responsible for things you had no idea that were going on.
Well, and that's why it's so important that we, as a board, understand what our policies are so that we don't find ourselves in the same position as Michigan State's board. And I know Brian Breslin, the chair of that board at Michigan State. He's a terrific guy. But again, you're only as good as the information you get. And I don't know what information they received from Luana, who again was an outstanding president. But the one thing we know is that they conducted a Title IX investigation, and if not exonerating him in 2014, they said that there should be chaperones in the room, and then the only one that knew that there should be chaperones in the room was Dr. Nasser, and Dr. Nasser wasn't taking any chaperones in the room. So I think Michigan State's got some real problems there.
We have less than 30 seconds. Any final thoughts about politics or Northern Michigan you want to share with us?
Northern's a great place. It gave me a tremendous education. It will give others a tremendous education. And it's really great to see you, Don, and see old friends from Ishpeming.
Well, it's really great talking to you. I wish we had twice as much time as we had today, but we don't. Thanks a lot for coming in.
Thank you, my friend.
Okay, appreciate it very much. I'll be back with some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. Well, new technology is great. It allows us to do a lot of things we couldn't do before. Of course, it's also true that in many cases we didn't even know we wanted to do those things before. Things like playing games on your phone, or getting the latest sports score, or keeping up with friends on Facebook. My old phone that was attached to the wall wouldn't do any of those things. But these new devices have their downside. For example, I don't know anyone's telephone number anymore. I don't claim to have memorized the phone book, but I used to have a pretty good memory for the numbers of people I knew and places and businesses I would call occasionally. Today, I don't remember any of them. I have trouble remembering my own number. Now, I just press a button on my cell phone, or I ask Siri to call them, and it happens. What's the downside? Try calling someone when you don't have your own phone. The numbers just aren't there in your head anymore. I know that all we must do is call information, right? Or as it's called now, directory assistance. You can do that, but there's a good chance you'll pay an extra charge. It's not an arm and a leg, but it's the principle of the thing. You see, there are still some of us around that remember when you could pick up your phone and say, information please, and talk with a live telephone operator. She would gladly give you whatever number you were looking for. There was no charge. The problem was some of us really took advantage of that friendly voice on the phone to get information that had nothing to do with the telephone company. I think that once I even asked a question about some homework assignment, and she actually helped me with the answer. And speaking about the telephone book, it used to come with a lot of useful information like city maps, zip codes, even listing some of the things to see and do in area communities. Not anymore. Some don't even have the residential phone numbers, you know. At one time, the telephone directory was like a standard eye test. As we get older, many of us eventually need glasses to be able to read smaller print. So once you found you could no longer read the listings in the telephone directory, you knew you had reached that point when it was time to see the eye doctor, get a pair of glasses. Nowadays, in some of the directories, they've made the print so small, even people with decent vision can't read it. I found myself putting on my glasses and then getting a magnifying glass to try to read the listing in the telephone directory. Well, despite my complaining, I must admit I do like my cell phone. I do like the fact that it can do so many things for me that phones could never provide before. But I do miss the personal service that used to come with my telephone. I miss those days when you picked up your phone and a friendly voice at the other end of the line would say, "Number, please. I'll be back in a minute." Well, our time is about up for another Sunday. The Today Show will be here in just a moment. Remember, if you missed this show or want to watch it again, it is available at uppermichigansource.com. Today's show will be there tomorrow afternoon. Past episodes are available right now. Thanks to Steve Mitchell for joining us this morning with some insights into Michigan politics and his role as an NMU trustee. And thank you for joining us. Let's make a date to meet at this same spot next Sunday morning.